My name is Scott Erven. I've done a fair amount of research on medical device security. Sean Merdinger also helped me out on a significant amount of this research that I'm going to show you on internet-facing medical devices and direct internet-facing attack vectors and threat modeling that we did. So there's a Twitter handles if you want to hit us up, get a hold of us, contact us or anything. So I often get asked kind of, why are you researching medical device security? What's your intent? Why do you even care about this, space? And personally, I've been in, security and IT for just over 15 years, but I've spent over 5 years specifically in healthcare security. So I've been in this space, I'm fairly familiar with it. And it's really, to me, it's kind of a patient safety issue that I see. And I also, want to be able to present these risks and also solutions to, defenders at various healthcare organizations to equip them to, protect these types of devices. There's no doubt that all these devices, save countless lives. They do what they're intended to do, but there's kind of some unintended consequences from not building security in that we need to be aware of and get better at. And ultimately, in the end, any organization I've ever worked for as a security professional, I felt that, okay, I could, contribute and protect the organization, hopefully, and it was a little bit rewarding, but I always struggled to find out how could I, directly contribute or affect the organization's, missions or values, those types of things. And when I started to look at medical devices, that's when I really realized I could make a direct impact on that. Locating vulnerabilities in these devices, working with the manufacturer to get them resolved and get them fixed, that's really rewarding. And that's when you kind of can look at this stuff as a security person and really say, I think, I contributed to patient safety. And pretty much any healthcare organization, who works for healthcare in here? Good. So I assume most of them say something about patient safety or quality care. Otherwise, you should probably find another organization to work for. Right? So also, there's a lot of folks that have kind of been misinformed, right? Physicians, public, just everybody. This is an excerpt out of one of the FBI. It was a private industry notice, but know that within a week or two, these private industry notices end up on the internet, so I'm not sharing anything I shouldn't be sharing. But it said the biggest vulnerability was the perception of IT healthcare professionals' beliefs that their current perimeter defense and compliance strategies were working when clearly the data states otherwise. So that's pretty powerful to come from the federal agency to say, hey, this is an issue, you guys need to wake up, you're behind. The other thing, if you're familiar with some of the research I did back early in the year, like in February or March, when I looked at specific devices, I got a lot of comments on the media articles that from the physicians and even from security professionals inside the healthcare organization, and they said, we understand that these risks are in the devices, but we guarantee you they're segmented off too, and we guarantee you they're behind firewalls. And I put my PhD credential on the line for that. So hopefully maybe I should email that guy back and tell him to strip his PhD title, but after I should look at my presentation. But anyways, I mean, it's definitely kind of why we wanted to look at the internet-facing stuff, to give, the public, to give people awareness into, what is the risk. Can these be accessed? I know personally that segmentation is becoming less and less likely inside of the healthcare organization because we're having to tap these devices into the medical record and share all this data in real time. And in order to do that, you got to open up and become a flat network. So I knew that reality was there, but people still think, and that goes to what the FBI is saying, that their perception is a little bit different than reality. This is kind of interesting. Sean found this from Avi Rubin, and he said, I've never seen an industry with more gaping holes. If our financial industry regarded security the way healthcare sector does, I would stuff my cash in a mattress under my bed. So that kind of goes, to show, and we continue even the financial industry to see breach after breach, and that's kind of an opinion of, how far even behind financial and retail that we are in healthcare. So also, just to give you an idea on this disclosure process for, what's in the talk here today. It was back in April when we set out these SMB findings, had a call with DHS and ICS CERT, and the end of May were some of the additional disclosures on some of the defibrillator stuff that I'll talk about, and anything where I mention healthcare orgs, unauthenticated access, those types of things. And we've also provided ongoing assistance to various, federal agencies, healthcare orgs, manufacturers. So I'm not drawing any 0 days today. Most of what I'm showing you is actually threat modeling. There are attack vectors that I'm going to show you, and the vulnerabilities.
Hello everybody, this is Iron Geek. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties. The Erven media seized up again, and we don't get any live video or audio from here out. However, the slides do continue. If you check in later on, you'll see that the audio starts up again around the 17-minute mark. Sorry for the inconvenience.
So you can just use new software radios and replay attacks against these devices. I mean, it's close proximity attacks, but you can change configuration values. So you can change upper and lower sensing limits of when these implantable defibrillators actually sense that you're going into cardiac arrest and initiate. You can also change like joule values, which change the limit of how many joules to deliver when it actually begins to induce shock. Second one here, this is pediatrics nuclear med imaging system. And the bottom one, this is interesting. We see anesthesia workroom. So anesthesia workroom, probably not actually associated to a medical device or anything like that. It could very well just be a nurse's station that happens to be an anesthesiologist or something like that. But the top one here is a little bit more interesting because that one says anesthesia OR. So if you know anything about the OR environment, again, it's very sterile, it's very controlled. They're not going to have excessive items in the OR. So this is pretty much certainly an anesthesia cart workstation inside of the OR that, as an attacker, I know specifically where to go to hit that anesthesia cart inside the OR now. All right, so you found one organization that happened to have 12,000 employees and dumped 70,000 systems, and you showed me showed us some examples, right, of some of these devices. So not only did we find thousands of healthcare organizations with this issue, and this is just a specific one, but it also wasn't just a couple devices. So we took all of the data and we used our favorite data analytics software called Excel, and we dumped it in there, and basically all we did was search finds for various keywords and to take the data to kind of identify. So we did also inside of just this one organization out of thousands, we found thousands of medical devices and supporting systems. So here's a summary of what we found inside that one organization. So we found 21 systems associated with anesthesiology, 488 associated to cardiology, that's your pacemaker, stuff like that. 133 associated to infusion systems, so infusion pumps, those types of things, the back-end systems that communicate with the infusion pumps. MRI devices, just under 100, just over 300 PACS systems. PACS systems, again, like I said, that's where all your imaging is stored. So right now, I think this is probably one of the biggest ways, even probably more so than the actual medical record, where we're getting financial gain from the hackers, breaking in and stealing medical identities. Because all of the PACS systems that I've done, while they have authentication and those types of things pretty much locked down inside of the application, every one of the back-end storage systems that they supply that communicates with it, all but one of them that I've assessed doesn't have a password on the back-end storage, or it's a hard-coded service account. So once you log into the application, then it actually does the query over the hard-coded service account, or doesn't use any type of authentication at all, so you can just dump the entire share of radiology images and grab all that patient information. So I think that's probably how a lot of the medical identity theft is coming out. 67 nuke med systems, and ultimately 31 systems associated to pacemaker technology and pacemaker controllers. So what are some attacks, right? So we've got a few. So we'll start with the physical attack. We now know what systems are there. We know the medical devices that they're associated to inside the organization. We also know the specific healthcare organization, and we know what location to go to. In a lot of these examples, we have the floor and we have the office number listed there. We know the physician, so we know their practice. And we also know if it has a lockout exemption. So we can walk into that facility, we can go to the second floor, Office 101, Dr. Johnson, we know they're a radiologist and they're going to probably have a reading workstation and connectivity to these back-end systems, and we know it has a lockout exemption. So I just very targeted as a physical attack, walk in there, sit down on that system. I can also then just go directly at the medical devices I'm interested in. Not noisy. Phishing attack, something similar. We have the same type of information now. We know the host name of all the devices and what they're associated with. So potentially, all you need to do now is just create a custom payload to execute. So instead of planting to that system and then going out and scanning and being noisy on the entire environment, we could be very strategic in an attack, right? So an attacker could now go in and say, oh, I just want to go after these specific host names because they're associated to the CT scanners or the pacemaker controllers. I don't need to mess with the noise on going after anything else anymore. So out of those 70,000 systems, I'm only going to go at 36 of them. Pivot attack. This one's a direct attack vector that we found. And this is where, the MS08067 is there. And oh yay, MS08067 just happens to be, remote code execution. It also happens to run default SMB port. So we know SMB is open on this back-end network completely. We know it has anonymous read from Active Directory because it's pulling in all that information from their Active Directory infrastructure. We can deploy that, and then we can pivot, and we can create custom payloads to directly, scan and attack the internal medical devices and systems that we're interested in. So it's not good. Now, here's some positive news before I get to more world's going to end stuff. And please know, like I said, there's definite risks here, but the bottom line, they save a lot of lives. So it's important to understand that too. But this was a really big win on this SMB stuff. So we did disclose it and coordinate that with DHS and ICS CERT. And we actually had the healthcare organization that's been using the example here. They actually reached back out. They were actually willing, and they shared with me, and I won't share it with you because it's confidential, but they stepped up. They handled it very maturely, which this is the first time that ICS CERT has handled coordination between a security researcher and an actual healthcare organization, third party. So ICS CERT has been working with us and handled lots of cases where we've reported disclosures to medical device manufacturers, but this is the first time that they had worked with a security researcher and an actual healthcare organization. So it was very positive. They shared the full incident response documentation. It was very thorough. They actually caught things that I could indicate on what types of attacks, but because I wasn't an actual attacker and I was open source tools, some of the stuff that they found I hadn't reported, but they were able to confirm. So it was very thorough. It was a very positive, I think, experience for everyone. Obviously, it's a little uncomfortable in any situation when you're reporting issues, but it was definitely a positive and new steps and new things when we're dealing with this coordinated disclosure. So I was happy with that. So, the SMB thing, so are they directly on the internet? So I showed you how we could pivot, get into these organizations and get to them over the internet, but are they directly on the public internet? Yeah, they are. It's not as gloom and doom as you would think. It is limited. There's two reasons for that. One, you don't have access. A lot of these things are custom, they're proprietary, so you don't have access to banners or things like that you could query in Shodan. Also, they're customized ports. We did run some customized port stuff, like I said, with Shodan and find some stuff. But it's not, hundreds of thousands of devices just sitting out there. In many cases, they utilize public cellular carrier networks. I'm going to show you an example here with some defibrillators from Zoll. So what do we find? This is just a brief overview. I'm going to show you a little bit on two of these examples just for time's sake. But we did find defibrillators, external defibrillators, sitting on the public internet. We also found fetal and infant monitoring systems directly on internet. Found home-based EEG systems, and we found a lot of PACS imaging systems, which I said before have very weak back-end infrastructure. They were sitting directly internet-facing. So what else did we find when we were looking at this internet face? Well, we found healthcare systems, completely unauthenticated edge routers into their entire network. Found device manufacturer infrastructure. There was anonymous FTPs, those types of things that have patient data and all of that in there. And third-party contracted organizations for these healthcare institutions that had things like FTP service with anonymous, things open that had confidential type data inside of them. So Sean actually did this one. He found this initially in 2012, and this was on fetal monitors. And I'm not going to name the manufacturer on this because on this one I don't think it's a manufacturer problem. We didn't find too many, so it was clearly, and there was no indication in their documentation that they recommended it being on the public internet. They clearly recommended otherwise, so it's not a specific manufacturer problem, although Sean did work with the manufacturer to reach out to some of those customers. But he disclosed it in 2012. We redisclosed it and re-updated it May 18th. So this is just a quick Shodan map. There's 28 that were left out there when we happened to check it that were still sitting on public IP space. And over half of them still had 2003 server IIS-6, plenty of vulnerabilities to take those systems over as well. They had a remote desktop full web access for support as well, and some of that had default type credentials associated with it in documentation. So who would do this? I mean, this is another thing, right? It's another good question. Like, who's going to do this? Well, there's a case of, okay, your adversary only cares about, they only care about financial gain. And I agree with that to some extent. Right now, those are the indicators that we see. Who read about, CHS hack, community health, 4.5 million. So is there anyone in here that got anything out of that other than 4.5 million patient records being exposed? Anybody? What's that? Like, was there anything else that stood out in any of the reports or anything other than just the fact that 4.5 million patient records were stolen? No. I think there was something on that. But to me, so most people, they read it and they're like, oh yeah, 4.5 million patient records. I read it and I'm like, I don't care. I replaced my credit card 3 times this year because of breaches. So, but what was interesting to me and what I caught on to in that, and what got my attention was they actually came out in the reports and in the FBI reports and they said they were also specifically targeting medical device information and IP rights. So I caught on to that right away. So if you know anything about med tech, and then also these were, trace back to like everything Chinese, APT groups. But nonetheless, if you know anything about China and the medtech industry, there's a huge push in China right now to develop medtech because they're having to import everything from other countries, from Europe and from the US. So there's a huge thing. So it does align for intellectual property stuff, these attacks against these healthcare organizations, and similar attacks in the last year against medical device manufacturers, that they're going against intellectual property rights. So that may say, oh, well, it's only about financial gain. Well, I don't think that's the case. The other one was, I got an email on one of the articles that came out from some guy, and I think he sent me probably 100 emails back and forth trying to tell me that they all live in caves and they're never going to figure it out, and you're telling them how to break into, the network. Completely ignorant. I think he worded it that, those schleps live in caves. I mean, it was something just completely outrageous, but, they're not the only ones, and they are a little bit more technically adept than that. So who should we worry about? I think we have, terrorist extremist groups. We get more technically adept. We get into ISIS cases, those types of folks. Nation-state sponsored attacks. That's who we need to look at. Patients themselves. This was an awesome one. So Sean found this, and he actually emailed me. And this is from Austria. And there was 2 patients that were gunshot wound victims. And so they were brought into the ER, and they were given and hooked up to an infusion pump with morphine drip. Well, it was a PCA module, so it's kind of self-controlled. I mean, it has upper limits, so they can only give so much so often, but it was a self-controlled thing, and they were telling the clinical staff, hey, it's not taking the pain away. So what did they decide to do? Well, they decided, hey, I'm going to go on the internet. I'm going to look up the service documentation. They found the service documentation. They found the default hard-coded credentials. They broke into the devices and changed the upper limits on their infusion pumps. A couple days later, they're wondering why they're not responding to meds. They developed like they basically got used to all the meds, and so they weren't working anymore. So that's kind of something I'd never thought about before, was the actual patient themselves. It was interesting when Sean sent me that article, and I was like, wow, it's kind of an interesting story or way to look at it too, that it's not just who you think of. Combined attack is probably the greatest risk. Between that and financial value and the financial attacks, that's kind of my opinion of why we've seen the FBI get involved. They released 2 advisories in April. The FBI hasn't had anything to do with putting out advisories on medical devices. It's been, FDA and then DHS ICS cert. But now FBI is very heavy, into this space. They're very interested in it, and I think it's that, those financial crimes and then also this, combined attack model. So Ed actually spoke here, and Ed runs CyberCity with CounterHack, and CyberCity has all of the critical infrastructure set up, right? So it's got all of the players in there. It's got the power plant. It's got the healthcare system. And another thing that I didn't put in the slide, but last week it came across in an article that Ed had commented on specifically about cybersecurity, and Ed's comment was, something to the effect that we had to harden our healthcare environment in CyberCity because it was just too easy to hack if we didn't. So that was kind of a, a bold statement there, and but I think a realistic statement as to, how far we're really behind. Kind of an eye opener though. So has an attack already happened? That's the other thing I get is, all right, we have risk versus likelihood. And I think it's clear there too, because a lot of people say, well, there's no risk in an attack against the medical devices. So we have to start further discussing, what that is. The risk, I think if you look at the risk, there's no doubt. Like I've shown that there's significant risk there, and you can do bad things to these systems. So then it becomes, what's the likelihood of that actually happening? And then it comes down to, has an attack already happened? And I like to then look at it of, well, is an attack intentional and targeted or unintentional? And how do we look at that going forward, and how do we get some of that data? Well, we have a challenge right now. Closed source closed source code. We have specialized proprietary protocols on these devices, so it's very hard. The forensic capabilities on these devices are lacking. They're very weak, and without that trail, how do we prove it, whether intentional or otherwise? How can we go back and look at it? So I'll tell you about some research that's upcoming here, where we're going to start to look at some of those ideas, since the devices themselves lack that stuff. But I can't tell you if an attack's already happened. I can tell you several 100,000 is the words from the FDA on medical device malfunction-related deaths and adverse patient events every year that get lumped into a general bucket of device malfunction that can't be adjudicated for a clinical cause of death. So unintentional, I think there's some stuff there. Interference. Yeah, I got it.
Are these things logging?
What? I'll get into it. I can talk to you, but for the most part, they don't. And by default, a lot of them are set not to, or they have very minimal stuff. I'll show you, some examples here. So why did we get there? Well, HIPAA, I think, for everyone in healthcare, I'm sure if anyone is in healthcare and on the security program, a big driver and why we have these security programs is solely from HIPAA. And anytime we write HIPAA in our budget request, it's going to get approved. So it's kind of forced us into this checkbox security, and it's very, over the last 5 to 10 years, we see that it's very compliance and information assurance driven, and it's going down and checking those boxes and writing those policies to meet HIPAA guidelines. It's not really looking at it from an adversarial resilience type testing. So what caused, why are we there with the manufacturers? Same kind of thing. They hadn't designed for adversarial threats. Same what we see in the auto sector, those types of things. They're just starting to build out their information security teams. So the largest manufacturers, Philips, GE, Siemens, they're just starting to get, executives in this space to kind of handle true information security threats, not, just compliance and information assurance. They've been focused on regulatory and 510Ks and pre-market submission approval requirements for the FDA too. And they haven't fully embraced, partnering with security researcher community. We're getting much better. We're starting to build those relationships. The larger organizations, there's a few actually smaller organizations that are doing a really good job. But for the most part, anytime we come into this, it's tough to coordinate that disclosure. It's ups and downs, and you have to navigate it. So where's the disconnects from the healthcare organization and the manufacturers? Well, who in healthcare here has had one of these and they say they can't patch, these types of devices? Anyone? Yeah. So you get that a lot. It's a bunch of baloney. The FDA's come out for years now. Here's a link to the document. It's on the FDA's website. There's a cybersecurity clause that allows you to patch these types of devices. There's very few cases where this is a valid exemption. Some of the implantables they do because there is a direct, patient care issue that they have to go back to resubmission. But 99% of your medical devices, it's not the case. Been told they can't change hard-coded support accounts, admin accounts. This is another big one. You can, but it goes to this next point of biomed and IS and information security integration. We don't see that. Who here has biomed and IS integrated in their organization? 95% of healthcare organizations don't have it. Some of the larger ones are just starting to do it because they're realizing the value that biomedical devices are now connected and they need to be part of IS and looking at information security controls. But right now, information security reports an issue on a medical device to the biomed tech. The biomed tech gets a hold of their engineering support contract at the manufacturer and says, we have a hard-coded credential you need to change. to which it goes to the manufacturer, the engineering and support side's manager, and says, whoa, that's how we get into all our customers. We can't change that. Tell them we can't change it. So then it comes back as, kind of an unofficial response from that organization to the biomed tech, back to information security, who says, hey, we can't change it, who just happens to accept that it can't be changed. All along, the information security people don't know the information security contacts at the manufacturer. So who here knows the information security contacts over at Philips or GE? We got one person. So it's very important to establish those relationships, know who those folks are. We are working on disclosure with a few of them. I'll actually share you some work that I did with Philips here later. So how do you get from keeping hacked? This is a big question. This is the way to do it. Go to the dive bar, get out of Wi-Fi range. This is a guy that's got an infusion pump, and he was sitting at the bar, but out of Wi-Fi range. There's no way I can hack that system because it's not on Wi-Fi. I can't push drug libraries to it. I can't do anything. But the smoking and the drinking and the infusing might get to him first. So had to drive around the block a couple times to get a good one. I just couldn't believe this guy. That is my picture. I didn't just randomly find that on the internet. Yeah, see, Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota. So solutions and recommendations, what can you do? Well, attack surface reduction, that's a big one. Use tools like Shodan and the API, Use tools like Metasploit or Core Impact or something like that and actually take a look at it. Shodan's not, just because I found this using Shodan, don't do Shodan and say, oh yeah, I did a pen test. We're okay. Because it only does limited services, right? So you really have to look at that type of stuff and look at it from an adversarial resilience or a red team type approach. We need internal programs in healthcare that are focused on med device security, working with biomed, integrated with biomed. Vendor selection process, procurement process is huge. And really how to build that to the board level is showing that you are, when you fix these things, you're affecting patient safety, affecting your mission and values for the organization. MDS-2 forms, these are forms that vendors fill out and typically do attestation, so they're, for the most part, I could probably do a whole nother presentation on, hey, this is the MDS-2 form that they filled out, and this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie. It's just going through the motions. But if you incorporate those into contracting or procurement, you're going to have a little bit more success. Incorporate indemnification clauses into the contracts for vulnerability remediation. You already in your contracting process, everyone thinks this is so difficult. You already in the contracting process have somewhere as a healthcare organization that says, we're going to test this on Citrix because we're so thin client. And you actually take that product in and you thoroughly test it on Citrix and thoroughly test it on every single thin client model that you have. But all you ask is it secure? And they give you some little vendor documentation and you accept it. You don't go through the motions. Just spend the time. But you spend the time to make sure it runs on VMware, make sure it runs on Citrix, and your other groups are doing all that. So it's not a new process. You already have the process. Just add something more for a security check and actually make it a check, not a checkbox. All right, so here's some defibrillator stuff. So Zoll-X series, this top one, these Zoll defibrillators, they are external defibrillators. They are used in ambulances, and they also have a 12 lead monitoring on a patient, and they're also connected, as you can see here. This is the Verizon. They use Verizon or AT&T cellular public networks to transmit all that data to the emergency department prior to that patient being presented or brought in. So these are the defibs, and this web interface is most likely the actual receiving type system. So you get here, you can see these are web servers that sit here. So you get to the web server, oh man, you need a certificate. Oh, there's your root certificates right on the home page. It's awesome. Well, they also are the first defibrillator to market with integrated wireless and Bluetooth by design. Like I said, they use the wireless and the Bluetooth, for an application on the physician's iPhone, and then they also use the Bluetooth for printing that out in the actual ambulance. And then they use the cellular connectivity and adapter to transmit that to the ED. All right, so this is kind of an example of how you can use documentation if you ever are interested in researching these devices without having your hands on the device. I haven't ever researched this device, so I don't know 100% what's vulnerable, what's not, but I just want to show you an example of how you can look at this and get very detailed information just going off documentation and support manuals that are available online. So this is how you would rewrite, the config file. We know, okay, well, it's zolconfig.xml. That's a file that sits on that device that handles all the configuration parameters for this type of device. We also know, okay, now we got to get to the supervisor menu in order to do that. Well, here's how you get to the supervisor menu on this defibrillator, and here's all the critical parameter values that can be altered, and how you alter them, and what the acceptable values for that parameter are. Well, in order to get into supervisor mode, you can see here in the top one that, hey, you need a 4-digit code, right? You can't just get into this thing, right? You need a code. 1, 2, 3, 4. Also, back to logging question that I had. Default value is that just user confirmation that you want to clear the logs. You just hit, yep, I want to clear them, boom, they're gone. Or you can enable the passcode. Passcodes, again, sets 1, 2, 3, 4. So really is that a secure design? I don't think it is. Like I said, I haven't had my hands on this device. There's a huge attack surface. There's wireless, there's Bluetooth, there's, the cellular stuff for a defibrillator. I mean, it is an external defibrillator, don't get me wrong, but it is a pretty big attack surface. So was it a problem? Was it just a problem with, the one product line at Zoll? No, there's all your service and supervisor passcodes for the rest of their product lines too. So there's the M series, R series, E series, and X series configuration passwords, as well as supervisor and service passcodes. And here's the CVEs for those defibrillators. So we released these at DerbyCon, and this was the first time too. Been working with CVE for a while now to get a process in place to track medical device specific vulnerabilities, so that we can get them out, responsibly, but still get them out to the public where they have enough useful information and aren't stripped out information. And so these were the first 2 CVEs published where we worked through that process. So, hats off to them. I've got some more stuff I'm going to show you here. So how are vendors changing? Well, they started engaging with researchers, right? Philips, I worked with them. They came out with this disclosure positioning. I'll show it to you here. Pretty standard. They're going to come out with responsible and coordinated disclosure policy by the end of the year for security researchers to break that barrier that I talked about. Not only for security researchers, I mean even healthcare organizations, that whole barrier between information security and biomed never getting to their security staff. This will allow them to track them inbound and so that they're aware of them and can fix them. They've been doing a really good job, Philips and GE as well, on handling this type of stuff. So what's coming up in this space? Well, there's a couple medical device events. We've made some progress here. The FDA is actually holding this first ever medical device workshop October 21st and 22nd, so I'll be attending that. And then IEEE and NSF and the Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute over at George Washington are holding a secure building code for medical devices in November, and I'll be going to that as well. If any of you are with Cavalry or things like that, I posted to the Cavalry Google group last night some sample code type things that we're looking for that workshop. So if you get on there and have any feedback, just get it back to me and I'll make sure to bring it back to these groups. But we're making some progress. These vendors are doing good. So what's my upcoming research that I'm going to be presenting on over the next year? Well, I've teamed up again and we're looking at medical device honeypots. This is going to be awesome. So we want to start gathering some data on the intentional versus unintentional stuff. And we also are standing up, rogue honeypots that are going to contain fake patient information and start looking at attack vectors, attack origins, those types of things from FTP sites. So we're putting out honeypots and we're going to start gathering some of this data. So hopefully within the next 12 months, I'll be able to start talking and presenting some of that research. I also want to let you know that I am currently coordinating disclosure, I won't say with you, but there's a very large medical device manufacturer on what I believe are potential vulnerabilities. Significant number. I'm not talking 10 or 20. I'm talking a significant number of vulnerabilities that we're working through disclosure on. So far, that manufacturer's been very positive to work with. I've worked with them previously, and they've been very responsive, and they're actually doing the right thing and putting the resources behind it. So because of that, I want to give them some time to get those things fixed and make sure it's a positive experience, overall, because it's really, precedent setting, I think, on what's going to come out of this one. It's a big manufacturer, And as we work through the process, I think it'll be positive for everyone. And know that CVEs have been reserved for every one of those. They are not publicly released yet. We will release them when I disclose it publicly. But those will be coming out too. So we'll get a little bit more comfort and familiarity behind putting these medical device vulnerabilities through, CVE, OSVDV, those types of things. So digital and mobile health device application research, that's some other stuff that I'm working on in the space. And big thanks to these guys. These top folks, they're either inspiration to me or they've helped us with our research. And, thanks to the various agencies that we've worked to, they've been great so far. I can't say, nothing negative about any of them. Specifically on here, thanks to Phillips working with me, working through this disclosure policy. I went in pro bono, so there's not a conflict. I'm not paid to be up here telling you anything about Phillips, but they did offer to work through that. So I think that's a big win for us overall. And there's our contact info if you need anything. Any questions? None. None at all. Nobody? All right. Well, I'll jump up here if you want to come up and talk to me. If you're in healthcare, I'd definitely love to talk to you. Otherwise, I'll be out in the hall. Thanks a lot.